Welcome to Our Story, Your Story, the video podcast where we share our personal experiences and invite you to share yours. We are Toby, Younis, and Shelley Carney, and together we'll take you on a journey through our lives and the lives of our family, friends, and guests. We believe that everyone has a story to tell, and we can all learn from each other's experiences. So whether you're looking for inspiration, entertainment, or simply a good story, you've come to the right place. Hello and welcome. I'm Shelley Carney. Tonight we're going to be reading from Chapter 2 of A Gypsy's Kiss.
And I'm Toby Younis. I'm the other half, and I'm not supposed to look at her. People complained that I was looking at her like I was mad. I'm not mad. This is just my serious face.
Serious face. He's very serious.
I'm Toby Younis, and I'm a very serious person.
That's right. So we're going to read Chapter 2, A Gypsy's Kiss, High School Hallway, and we'll get into the theme that is most prevalent in this chapter. And I would like you to think about what that theme might be, and then we'll start telling some stories from our own lives to expand on that theme.
So this is interesting because I think you know what the theme of each one of these chapters is.
Well, I mean, I read it earlier in the week, but I found 3 themes in there.
Oh, really?
Some of the stuff you've talked about last week in our Chapter 1 show. So you may go back there and re-listen to that if, there's some stories in here that we don't touch on tonight that because we talked about them last week.
All right.
All right.
Let's go.
All right. Chapter 2, High School Hallway. I turned to the right and down the long second-floor hallway toward the large window at its end. It faces south, bringing lots of light into the hallway and reflecting it off the polished floors. Some of the boys' high-top Converse shoes make squeaky noises as they hustle by me. I have 5 minutes to get to my next class and prepare to absorb an understanding of biology from jolly, enthusiastic, pot-bellied Brother William. I use these few minutes to clear my brain of English class as I walk up the hallway, down the stairs, and back down the first-floor hallway, following the regulated foot traffic pattern instituted by the St. Michael's administrators. St. Michael's High School caters to day students and boarding students. The day students come from the area in and around Santa Fe. I was born and raised in Santa Fe, and my family lives here, not far from the school. But I am at St. Michael's as a boarding student. I should explain that. When I was 11, my father died along with his 2 brothers in a plane crash. My entire family experienced the trauma of suddenly losing a father and 2 uncles. As a result, I became angry, mostly at my father for dying, abandoning me, really. I was indignant and resented the unfairness of life. I never got any closure since my brothers, sister, cousins, and I could not go to the funeral. Our mothers deemed it too dangerous, the roads slippery with snow and ice due to an out-of-the-ordinary winter storm between Santa Fe and Taos. Taos is where my father and 1 uncle are buried. They buried our other uncle in Arizona. Anger expressed itself as rebellion. I suppose it was to hide the hurt, fear, and loneliness I didn't admit to anyone, bottling it up inside. My mother thought by sending me to seminary in 9th grade, the Catholics would solve her oldest child's rebelliousness and keep me from transferring that unruly behavior to my younger siblings. After about 3 months, the seminary administrators very politely asked me to leave, saying that I wasn't priestly enough. I'm sure it was because I asked more questions than was comfortable for them and refused to accept their answers of, "It's a mystery," or "It requires faith." I finished my 9th grade year at Our Lady of Guadalupe Junior High School. The following school year, I was sent as a boarding student to St. Michael's High School, about a mile away from my house. "Hey, Oscar, will I see you here tomorrow morning?" I call out to my friend as he hastens to math class. He signals back with a thumbs up. I have friends, good friends. I'm the lead singer in a cool band and a member of the boys' choir and play tennis and football. I participate in the chess club and forensics team And I'm a representative to the student council for the sophomore class. I have a girlfriend, Evangeline. Blonde hair, blue eyes, smart and pretty. She's a student at Loretto High School, just down the street from St. Michael's. Loretto is an all-girls school. They don't have boarding students, just day students. I have plans to attend Loretto's spring mixer with her. All in all, I guess you could say I don't have a bad life, but it isn't a perfect one, and definitely not the one I would have chosen for myself. I know I'm fine on my own, but I miss my family too. That's what I'm having such a hard time dealing with, I guess. I wish I could see my brothers and sister more often. My brothers and I used to play street football and ride bikes together with our friends. My brother Vincent and I spent our summers on the Santa Fe Plaza, shining the boots worn by the Texas tourists and selling them newspapers. Then we could buy candy and comic books and go to the matinee at the El Paseo movie theater on Saturdays, while my mother went to the hair salon. I wish my mother would show up to my football games the way my dad did. I wish I could see my aunts and uncles more often at Thanksgiving, Christmas, and I wish I could see my aunts and uncles more often than at just Thanksgiving, Christmas, and spring break. Freddie and George, two other boarding students from California, exchange waves with me as they meander through the crowd. Their sun-bleached blonde surfer boy haircuts bob through the river of white, long-sleeved dress shirts, dark ties, and khaki slacks of the St. Michael's student body. The boarding students at St. Michael's are an interesting lot. They come from wealthy families on the East and West Coast and are here because they are just as rebellious as me. Our parents are all hoping that the Christian brothers can coach some rebelliousness out of us. They make excellent friends because they come from places that, up to now, I've never seen. Listening to them talk about their homes sparks a desire in me to travel to San Diego and San Francisco. I want to go to New York City, too. I want to see the East Coast all the way from Maine to Florida, and I promise myself one day I will. Arriving at the door to my next class, I slow my pace. Brother William is standing at the door and greeting us by our last names as we arrive with his cherubic round face beaming with delight. I put my books down and open my biology text to the page I know we'll be discussing. Brother William is pleasant, always happy, and makes learning biology a great deal of fun. It's never hard to be in biology lab with him because he's always excited about dissecting the next small mammal, amphibian, large insect, or snake. Before the ringing of the second bell, I hear the French accent of Brother Andre. Mardi Gras is coming this Tuesday, Brother William. Indeed, Brother Andre. Will you be returning home to celebrate? Mardi Gras translates to Fat Tuesday. It's the day before Ash Wednesday, the beginning of the Catholics' 40-day Lenten season, the somber days of penance that lead into the Easter holidays. Brother Andre comes from a location near the home of the Christian Brothers in Metairie, Louisiana. Since that's where the brothers are headquartered, Mardi Gras is special to them in a way that makes them smile and sometimes laugh when they talk about it. When it's close to Lent, it will come up as a topic of conversation in class, and they tell us their Mardi Gras stories. None of us, not the day students or the boarders, have ever been to Mardi Gras. But I suspect each of us imagines we must experience it one day. The gleeful moment of conversation between Brother William and Brother Andre, along with the memories it brings to mind, puts a twinkle in Brother William's eye that remains throughout the day's biology class. For me, Mardi Gras is a dream that sounds a lot like our annual Santa Fe Fiesta, but so much bigger and more grand. Our fiesta is 3 days of parties, family reunions, carnival games, and great fun. The entire town looks forward to it every year. One day, I believe I will make the pilgrimage to Mardi Gras and see for myself what it's all about. We have a picture of Toby in school, Toby and Tank, and Evangeline. And if you can kind of see, they're circled and they have their names.
So that was the 9th grade graduating class at OLOG.
Our Lady of Guadalupe.
I have to make a correction.
Mm-hmm.
My father never saw me play football.
Oh.
He saw me play baseball.
Oh.
Football didn't start till high school, but before that, I used to play baseball, and he used to go to all my baseball games. I don't think my mother ever has seen me play a sport.
Yeah.
Had ever seen it. She didn't go to football and or tennis. I mean, I don't think. I'm trying to think if my mother has ever seen me in any kind of public performance.
You know, I think when you were growing up, and in my younger years as well, parents
Didn't participate.
didn't, and were not expected to
Yeah.
be a part of their kids' school life.
Yeah.
You sent them off to school, and then you were supposed to be like, okay, I did my job, I got them to
Mhm.
school, and then when they came home again, you know, you had dinner for them, and you
Right.
got them off to bed, and that was it.
I
That
think I
was your
have
job completely.
videos of every game, regardless of who was playing and what sport it was,
Mhm.
and every on stage, you know,
Mhm.
and every trombone. Oh, let's see.
And you were a coach for your soccer
Right.
for soccer.
Yeah.
My husband was coach for the kids' volleyball teams.
Mhm.
We were a lot more involved in our kids' lives, I think.
Than our parents
Yeah,
were. Yeah.
yeah.
Isn't
And
that
I think
funny?
maybe we were because we wished our parents had been.
Well, I just realized because it said I made a comment about her not showing up to my football games, and I guess, and I'm not saying that I didn't say it then or now in anger,
Right.
but I realized my father never didn't.
Do you remember a lot of parents coming to games like that?
I remember it well because it was a Santa Fe school, so it was like other yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was a Santa Fe school, especially our annual rivalry with Santa Fe High School, which was, I don't know, 5 times bigger than us, and we'd get our butts beat every year up there at Fort Morrissey Field. So, yeah, it was like the thing. It was like a small town Friday night football.
Mm-hmm.
Like even people who weren't parents would show up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people that had nothing to do didn't
They'd
have
gone to
students
the
in
school,
schools. Yeah,
maybe,
exactly.
or for some reason.
That was, and it's basketball even more so. Basketball was because we had a great coach. We had a, state class coach, even
Mhm.
though we were a smaller school, and we won several state championships over time. And we had during when I was a sophomore, we had a student whose name was Nick Pino, and he happened to be 7 feet 2 inches tall. And all he had to do is literally stand at one end of the court. You'd throw him the ball, and he'd reach up and put it in the basket. It's pretty funny. We once
So
built.
what
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
do you feel is the main theme of this?
So I think
chapter?
part of it is the theme of for me, it was the expansion of my world. Up until that time, my world consisted of Santa Fe and Taos. Santa Fe, where I'd spent my school year, and Taos, where I spent my summers, and then the Taos summers were always at the ranch, right at my grandmother's ranch. But now, as a result of influence of the Christian Brothers and the boarding students, my world was expanding. I wanted to see other things besides Santa Fe and Taos. I remember up until that point, the world that I was in, the world that I live in, New Mexico with families there, Santa Fe with my mother's families there, and Taos and my father's family there. That was my world. Now we went on vacations. I remember going to, Disneyland and going to California, going to the beach in California, those kind of driving vacations, you know. But my world was expanding as a result of the influence of the combination of the Christian Brothers and the boarding students, because they loved talking about where they were from. They always talked about, how difficult it was to live with rich parents, who expected so much of you. They had the funniest perspective, like, they want me to go to Harvard. I hate Harvard, like, really? No, I'll go to Harvard for you. So I think that to me was the expansion of my world would be my main theme in there. What you said that you thought there were 3 themes in there. What were the other 2?
Well, the
Or-
one that
or
I
did I-
put in the thumbnail and that I thought was the main thing to me is when and this continues throughout the book, but I think we really began to focus on it with this chapter choice, making, being, having the ability to make your own
Mhm.
choices.
Mhm.
And as we get older, we get to have more choices. And of course, with choices comes responsibility for having made your choices. You chose to go there. You chose to do that. Now you have to live with it, right?
Right.
You made your bed. Now you have to lie in it. So there are some choices that you were denied, such as going to the funeral. Now, that was, of course, a combination of the weather and the road conditions and just the way things were back then, that they didn't hold funerals until the weather was better. They just didn't do that. And they didn't concern themselves with the children being at the funeral.
There
It
was
was not for the children.
Right.
It was for the spouse and, the parents or the family. That was all adults. So you didn't have that choice there. Then you were sent off to seminary and you didn't fit in there. You had too many questions. You weren't accepting it's a mystery, it requires faith. You were like, no, that's not a good enough answer. You need to explain it better than that. You need to have more evidence. You were and because your father had gone to lawyer school, he had a
Law school.
degree
That's right. He has a degree as attorney.
As an attorney. He taught you to look for evidence of things and to judge it in that way. So, of course, you were going to be asking these kinds of questions, even though your mom had thought you were going to grow up to be a lawyer because your dad was. When you had these tendencies, that didn't please her, that you would be questioning the priests. Well,
it was funny because I do not believe that my father was by nature a religious person. He the questions could not have been answered. His questions could not have been answered by religion, but I think he practiced for my mother's sake because she was very religious and she didn't question her religion.
Yeah,
in
that's
any
not
way.
uncommon.
And that's right. It's not uncommon, but I was and I didn't realize this until later in life, that it was very likely that my father was just tolerating her religiosity, in a good and loving way. I never saw him complain. He was at church with us every Sunday in suit and tie. And
that was the way that young men were brought up in that time anyway, was that you looked for a woman to take to wife who was, religious or, exemplified those qualities that you would find in a wife and mother rather than someone you would run around with as a girlfriend.
Well, and the other thing about my mother is she had gotten a lot of her adventuresomeness out of her system as part of having served in World War II. And by the time she met my dad, they met in like 1947. She was a practical working woman, and she married a man that was, I think, at least 20 years older. He was 20 years older, and she was his fourth marriage. It was her first, but it was his fourth. So they were destined for each other. And I believe there was a great deal of love between them. And I think it was good for both of them. It settled him down and it gave her an opportunity to focus on something that made her happy, and he knew that. And the most common phrase used between my dad, I don't want to say it was the most common, but one of the most common phrases that were used between my dad and I was, "Don't tell your mom." Don't, because she wouldn't be happy. Like, she wouldn't be happy. He used to take me to that on Thursday afternoons. He'd leave the dealership early, and we'd go to a bar called El Tecolote. It's on the corner of San Francisco and Alameda, I think. And we go down into the basement, and he knew the guy that owned the place, and they would have a running poker game there. Not a continuously running. They'd play poker for the evening, and my job was to refresh their beer bottles from the Coke, one of those old style Coke machines. Instead of having Cokes in them, they had beer bottles in them. And I was still dressing in white outfits with little suspenders and, like what's his name, Mazzy. They have Mazzy dressing all the time. And my job was to get the beer to get the beer out of the Coke bottle machine, open it and take it to them, and they'd give me a quarter tip. And then I'd go, there were barber chairs, and I'd go sit on the barber chairs in my little white outfit, with my little haircut. And
Still wearing white today.
yeah.
So back to choices. When we wrote this chapter, you talked about that you were sent as a boarding student
Mhm.
to St. Michael's, and you couldn't really understand why you had to live at the school when your family's home was a mile or so away from your school. You could have gone home every night. You couldn't understand why you were sent away. And I compared that, that you didn't really have the choice there. Had you been given a choice, would you have chosen to live at St. Mike's? Would you have chosen to stay at home? You did miss your mom and your sister and your brothers, but at the same time, you were developing these stronger bonds with the people you were living with, the other boys at the school and the Christian brothers who were there as well. And then I remember, we talk about PTSD, and you went to Vietnam, and you were in combat, and we asked you several times. I've heard people ask you, and I've asked you, did you have PTSD when you came home? And you said, not really. And part of that is because you had the choice of going. You joined up. You decided you wanted to go to Vietnam. They gave you other choices and you picked it. And you felt like, because it was your choice, you didn't have that struggle. Whereas when you were sent to St. Mike's as a boarding student, you didn't have that choice. So you had more of a struggle. Why? Why am I here? Why am I living here? So how do you correlate those two?
So first of all, let's talk about, but we've got to start at the later half. So one of the things that I learned almost immediately in the military is that the military will do anything for somebody that volunteers for something, right? If you volunteer for something, they'll give it. If you volunteer for a combat zone, they'll give it to you. They don't think it's a great idea, but they'll give it to you, right? So I was in a service element, the Army Security Agency, they were constantly reminding us we were in the top 10% of the military, right? And that's why we were there. 5 years of service, top scores on our IQ test, et cetera, et cetera. And I was chosen for intelligence analyst, not Charlie. At the time, they called it traffic analyst. And so I had a pretty creamy position. Well, several weeks into that, and this is after basic and AIT, several weeks after that, into that, they give you a list of places where you would like to go, where you'd like to be assigned. And because you were agency, it was very likely you were going to be assigned to one of the major consulates. London, Paris, Rome, you name it, you could get there and all you had to do was check a box. And they didn't have one for Vietnam. And so down at the bottom, I wrote my own little box and wrote my own little Vietnam. And the teacher at the front, who was a non-commissioned officer, was picking up the papers. And he looked at them, and of course, I'm at the back of the class, and he says, "Oh, what do we got here?" He had a Southern accent, but they always exaggerated. "What do we got here? Some kind of hero? Is that right, Mr. Younis? You want to go to V8 now?" I said, "Yes, Sergeant." He said, "That's not even on the paper. You had to draw it in. Is that right?" And I said, "Yes, it is right. That's what I want to do." And he said, "Well, I think that's dumb stupid, but hell, it's your choice." And that's what it was. The one of the most important lessons I learned in my life is that when my father died, I didn't have a choice in the matter. I didn't have a choice of him dying. I didn't have a choice of how he died. I didn't have a choice of whether to go to the funeral or not. All those choices were made for me. And I realized that life is a combination of the choices that you have no choice about, things that happen in your life that you don't have. When you die, you don't have a choice unless you decide you want to commit suicide, right? There are choices in life that you don't have. When you lose the people around you, for example. So you ought to take advantage of when you do have choices. And so once I realized I didn't have the choice to go to St. Michael's, what I had at that point is the choice of what to do with that. Whether just to be angry and waste 3 years worth of wonderful friendships and wonderful examples of learning from the Christian brothers. And so life after that became very much easier when I realized that A, I don't have choices. I don't have all the choices. But once those choices of which I don't have control are made for me, I do have choices what to do with them. I can either be angry about it the rest of my life, or I can make choices that help me move forward. I chose to leave college in the latter half of my senior year. I chose to join the military. I chose the Army Security Agency. I chose the schools that I wanted. I chose jump school, ranger school, language school, target area orientation. I chose all of those. I chose to go to Vietnam. And when I got back, I chose to be assigned at Fort George G. Meade, the National Security Agency, so that I could go work for them, because I knew that when I ETS'd out of the Army, I could go to work directly for the National Security Agency as a civilian at 3 or 4 times the salary. So I've always had this conversation with my children, and that is, you have choices. Your life is all about the combination of choices that are made for you, of which you have no control, and the choices that you make as a result. And St. Michael's was my first opportunity to experience that. I could have chosen to be angry and gone through 3 years of misery, not gotten, graduated from high school without any learning. Or I could choose to go to St. Michael's, enjoy the presence of the Christian brothers, they were as good as they could be, enjoy the presence of my friendships with both day students and boarding students, and enjoy the learning associated with things like tennis and football and chess and debate and student council and model UN and all those things that I chose to do, because each one of them was a better learning and growth experience. By the time I was a senior, I was the president of the Young Democrats Club in Santa Fe. That was a choice. And so that idea that, there are some choices that are made for you when your parents die, for example. And then the majority of choices in life are your own. And so you decide what choices to make. So I think that's interesting that you picked that up as a theme in this about choices. What was the other one? The other theme that
It was just basically grief recovery, because this is kind of the beginning of how we started talking about how your father had passed, and that you became rebellious. And it was sort of that, again, the choices were made for you, but you get to choose how to respond to whatever happens to you. And in this case, probably subconsciously, because you're still a kid, you chose to rebel because, hey, my choices were taken away from me, and I'm angry about that. And that's I'm going to manifest it by doing, this or that, by probably acting more like your dad, even though you thought you were being rebellious. You were probably being more like him than ever. That's just the way it tends to be. You picked up on all those lawyeristic tendencies and started questioning everything. There were probably other things that were inherent from him that you started to really manifest in your life as well. Do you think of anything else like that?
Well, so one of the questions I would hear him ask, I don't ever remember him saying, what's the evidence for that? Because I think that would have made him sound like a lawyer and like an attorney. And I think he wasn't. At that point, he didn't study for the bar. He didn't take the bar. He wanted a business for his family. Right. And I don't mean not only for us, but for his brothers and mothers and sisters who were all counting on him, kind of, because he was the oldest to take over. But I think one of the things that I remember him doing all the time, rather than saying, what evidence do you have for that? And he would do it to me too. Even at my youngest, he would say, "So what's real? Which part of that is real? Right? Which part of that can you touch? Right? Which part of that makes it?" He asked those kinds of questions. Which part of it is real? And then I could tell as people were going like, Toby, I need this truck, and I can give you 400 pounds of pignon for it. Which part of that is real? Well, you have a truck, and I have 400 pounds of pignon. I don't know what I'm going to do with 400 pounds of pignon. I need $800 in cash. But and so he was always had those conversations that were filled with questions. He asked more questions than he talked, and when he talked, when he did say something, it was always important. It was always the answer to the situation. He knew how to do that, and that was a lesson I took into business with me. I didn't realize it until later, until somebody walked up and they asked, "Why do you always wait till the end? Whatever meeting we were having on whatever topic, why do you always wait till the end?" And I said, "Well, I'm just listening. I want to make sure I have an answer that's in line with what we're talking about, But I realized that trait, that I inherited that from him, because he would ask questions and like a good attorney and not talk.
Mm-hmm.
So, I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, and so the choices that leads to your responses, that leads to recovering from grief. Now, that was a longer process that started from when he passed until you said you made amends,
When I came back from
an
Vietnam.
understanding of it. When you came back from Vietnam, and part of that being because you had seen death so much, you got a better understanding of what it was, I think.
Well, that was certainly part of it. But the other thing too is I was advancing in age. I was getting older, and I was getting more realistic about what life was, and incorporated into the concept of life is automatically the concept of the end of life. And so that's what was real. What's real? You're gonna be born, you're gonna live a certain number of days, and then you're gonna die. And that's what was real. And that wasn't his fault. That wasn't my fault. It wasn't my mother's fault. It wasn't God's fault. It was nobody's fault. That's the nature of life.
Mhm.
It has a beginning, real good middle, if you make it that way, and then an end. It's a hero's journey, right? It just doesn't have 3 chapters at the beginning and 3 chapters at the end. It has that little instant starting and that little instant ending, and then there's a whole big middle story in between.
Yeah.
And it's what you make of it.
Did you find any other themes in this chapter that you wanted to
The
focus
one that I can remember going back to was, as we were talking about the chapter, was the expansion of my world.
Mhm.
From Santa Fe to the 65 miles between Santa Fe and Taos, and the occasional trip to Pecos, because a lot of my time was spent on the Rio Grande between Santa Fe and Taos with my father, where my father loved to fish, and he loved the places on the Pecos that we go fishing where he did. So it was the expansion of my world and the realization that my world is as good as I would choose it to be. And I can put that in contrast to my brothers and sisters who, and you have to remember, as my daughter always reminds me, they lost their father too. But their choices were not as well resolved. They made choices.
I think you could say that their choices were more about short term and yours were more about long term.
And I didn't know it. I was too young to know that at the time. I didn't know when I was leaving college in my senior year of, in the last semester of my senior year. I didn't realize that was a long-term choice. To me, that was, I just don't want to go back to Santa Fe. I don't want to tell my mother I'm not a pre-law student. So at the time, it seemed like a short-term choice, but it was actually much longer term because it literally that decision to join the military pretty much influenced the direction of the rest of my life.
So Well, let's get into that a little bit more. The difference between choosing what is good for the short term, what feels good, what seems right for right now, as opposed to choosing for the long haul, choosing for the rest of your life, the direction that you're going to be going. And how do we know when we're making a choice and which one it is?
Well, if you've ever had a hangover, you know, right? And I'm not just talking about the results of a binge the night before. I'm talking about the kind of hangover that comes as a result of you realizing that you made a really bad short term decision. And the hangover might be the result of your body still trying to get rid of the alcohol, or it could be the result of you trying to figure out why you decided to marry this guy or this girl, or why you got into this house, or why you started this business, or whatever, right? There's always a hangover associated with a bad decision.
Mm.
And so when you get that feeling like the hangover is your indication that the decision you made just before the hangover was a bad decision.
It was not in your own best
Yeah,
interest.
yeah. You don't know it until big. It was what you know more than anything else is not only was it bad, but it was short term, and you're suffering the results of it. And if you had said to yourself, you know what, I would love to go get drunk with you guys tonight, but I'm going to take that money and I'm going to put it in the bank. Right.
Mhm.
That would have been a
I'm going to
better,
go home to my wife and child
yeah,
instead.
yeah. And that would have been so much better a long-term
Mhm.
decision.
Yeah.
But you did the short-term decision that caused the hangover. And the reason this is so easy for me to tell is I used to tell my children this exact same story. But Dad, I don't drink. I don't, oh hell, you were in high school and college, trust me. But I said, and I don't mean just an alcoholic hangover. Any hangover, you'll feel a hangover when you realize and the just could be a week or a month or whatever, just made a bad decision because you get a hangover from it.
Hangover could be another word for regrets.
Yeah, and what you try as hard as is possible, as hard as you can, is to not experience the regret associated with it. When in reality, you should have at least an amount of regret equal to the amount of time that you spent earning the hangover. Right. Go ahead and let yourself experience the regret, because during the regret, what happens to your mind is opened up to the possibility of what you have to do to make up for that, or to change that, or to do something else the next time somebody says, let's go get blasted. Let's take off for a week and go to Miami.
Mm-hmm.
There's let's steal our uncle's motorcycle and head for Mardi Gras. Right.
Yeah.
And then you experience the hangover. The hangover is, in this case, a long train trip back to Santa Fe. And then there's the regret of having done all of that and having to explain it to the people that you love and that love you. And that's all good time, so that you can start the process of learning how to make better decisions, better choices.
And that's how we grow up.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Hopefully it's how we grow up, because a lot of times some of the bad decisions you make end up in not growing up. So you have to be very cautious about that.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you do grow up.
That's right.
I've been following this case about this young woman who was in college. And what started me on the trail was YouTube showed me the video of her in the hospital with a police officer after the accident. She had just killed 2 people. She had just literally driving drunk with marijuana in her purse in a state where marijuana is not legal. She just run over 2 people, and her callousness, her behavior was just to the point that the policeman said to her, let me explain this. You're not going back to school tomorrow. You're going to jail tonight. You're going to have to bond out if an attorney will bond you. And then he explained to it. And as far as I can tell, you're the most pathetic person I've ever met, because she didn't have any sense of what had just happened. And it was beyond just being drunk. And I don't know what touched me. I started the whole, wow, that was a bad choice, and let's see what she does with it now. She tried to get her car fixed. It was totaled. She wanted to go back to school. She managed to infuriate all of the students that she went to school with in college because she was just the most important person in the world. Eventually, they went to court, and I just found out last April she was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Now she's appealing the case, but that young woman's life is over for all intents and purposes. Eventually, she will serve those 14 years for having killed two people. And honestly, it could have been longer, considering if that jury had seen her behavior in the hospital room afterwards. I can't imagine they would be anything but angry, you know. And I thought to myself, well, there's a good example of someone who didn't learn from a bad choice, never showed regret, never showed anything but the callousness of what's important is what's in store for her. She wants to finish. I'm only 2 weeks away from graduating. You know, no, you're going to jail tonight. You don't have a car anymore. So I don't know if that was her fault or her parents' fault, but something was wrong with the choices that she was making, and whether or not she was experiencing the regret, because you have to experience the regret in order to prepare you for whatever learning comes next.
Yeah. And I think we all have to be responsible for our own choices, unless we are a child 7 and or younger. Then of course we need guidance until then, and there has to come a time when what choices we make are our own responsibility, and we can't blame our parents, because there are many people in the world who have had very hard upbringing, orphans, and just poverty and everything else, and yet they have made the choices to rise above all of that and to become somebody, and to make a real example out of their lives. So we know it can be done, and we can't continue to blame and hold on to our upbringing and say, oh, but I had all these problems when I was growing up, so that's why I'm a wreck now. No, sorry. The choices you make today are what happens in your life today. You can't go back and say, well, when I was 3, I was abused. Well, you're not 3 anymore, you're 49. So let's deal with today and make the right choices today, and stop blaming, because blaming isn't going to help you. It's making good choices that helps you.
So you read that paragraph where I said my mother had sent me to St. Michael's because I was being rebellious, and I literally was asked to leave seminary.
Yeah.
I just didn't have what it took to be a priest. They said that was their phrase. You're not priestly enough. Okay, I didn't think I could have told you that, but after going to St. Mike's, you'd have thought that my perception of St. Michael's was negative. Because I was forced to go there. The reality is I so much enjoyed my time at St. Mike's, and I spoke of it so highly that my oldest son asked to be sent back to Santa Fe so he could go to St. Mike's and graduate from there. So his name would be up there on the sets of pictures that they used to have in the hallways. So I've always thought of St. Michael's in a very fond way. I don't think of St. Michael's in a negative way. And to me, it's where I made some great friends and learned some great lessons and made some great choices that affected me the rest of my life.
Yep. So go out and make good choices.
That's what it's boiled down to. Now, nothing is perfect. Some choices are going to be made for you. You're not going to have any choice in the matter. But you can make your own choices based on the choices that are made for you. And secondly, if you make a bad choice, experience the hangover, and then deal with the regret, and then learn from the regret and move forward to whatever is next. Try not to make that choice again.
Easy. That's life. All right. Well, that's all we have for this evening. We hope that you got some enlightenment and enjoyment out of tonight's story, chapter 2. And, if you have any stories you would like to share about choices you made in your life, whether they turned out really well or really poorly, and what you learned from those experiences, we would love to hear from you. So you can write to us at stories@agkmedia.studio, or just leave a comment in the comment box for us.
That it?
That's all.
Thanks for watching tonight. Look forward to seeing you guys again.
Thanks for listening to Our Story, Your Story. We hope you enjoyed hearing our stories and those of our guests. We invite you to share your own stories with us by emailing us at stories@agkmedia.studio. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. Until next time, keep telling your story, because your story matters.